I'm Eleanor Chestnut, 32, and I've built a stable life from the ground up. No shortcuts, no handouts. For years, I supported my mom through every crisis, managed my late father's estate with care, and bit my tongue more times than I can count. But when she and my stepfather ambushed me over brunch with legal papers trying to take my inheritance, I made a decision that changed everything. Ever been blindsided by someone you thought had your back? Drop your story in the comments, you're not alone. Before we get into it, let me know where you're watching from. And if you've ever had to draw the line after being pushed too far, tap like and subscribe. What came next might just surprise you. My name is Eleanor. I'm 29, and if you asked most people who know me, they'd probably say I'm the dependable type. I pay my bills on time, I show up early, I return the grocery cart. It's not a personality trait, really, it's a habit I developed out of necessity. Someone had to be the stable one. My dad died when I was 11. Heart failure. Sudden, ugly, and too fast for anyone to prepare. He was a small business attorney, practical, kind, and deeply invested in making sure things were taken care of. After he passed, it didn't take long for life to shift. My mom tried. She really did. But grief sat on her like a fog, and within a year, she met Ronald. Ronald came from her high school days. A familiar face from the past who swooped in with reassurances and promises of taking care of things. They were married within 18 months. I was 13 and had just started 8th grade. I remember the day I came home from school and found out they'd eloped. No warning. Just 2 champagne glasses in the sink and Ronald's suitcase in the hallway. From the start, something about him didn't sit right with me. It wasn't dramatic, he wasn't cruel or overtly manipulative, at least not in ways you could easily point to. It was more the subtle things. Calling me kid instead of my name. Laughing off my questions about money with, "Don't worry your pretty little head." The way he always seemed more interested in appearances than substance. Still, I tried. For my mom. She looked lighter with him. Not happy, exactly, but distracted in a way that made her easier to be around. So I stayed quiet and tried to blend in. I cooked dinner on nights they both worked late. Picked up groceries when the fridge was empty. Took care of the utilities when she forgot to send in the checks. If something needed fixing, I was usually the one to handle it. When I turned 16, my dad's estate attorney reached out. There was a trust set up for me, a mix of life insurance, savings, and a small portfolio he'd quietly built for years. My dad had been meticulous. The trust was airtight. It would transfer fully to me on my 25th birthday, with limited early access for education, medical expenses, or emergencies. My mom knew about it, but the control was never in her hands. That part mattered. At the time, the trust didn't mean much to me. I was focused on high school, part-time jobs, figuring out how to pay for college without asking for help. But by my junior year of undergrad, when I needed to cover a semester gap after losing a scholarship, I used the trust for the first time. I emailed the estate manager, filled out the forms, and got a tuition check processed without a hitch. No family drama. No negotiation. Ronald didn't comment then, but years later, after I graduated and started working full-time, his attitude began to change. He'd make these casual remarks at dinner, like, "When we redo the kitchen, maybe Eleanor can help fund it. She's got that little nest egg." Or, "Your dad would have wanted his money to benefit the whole family, not just sit in some account collecting dust." I usually stayed quiet. Correcting him didn't seem worth the argument. But the comments didn't stop. If anything, they grew bolder once I moved back into town and started helping my mom more regularly. She'd call me when the internet went out, when her car battery died, when the water heater started leaking. I didn't mind, she was my mom. And for all our differences, she never asked for much. At least, not directly. Still, it added up. I paid for her car repair once when Ronald forgot to renew the warranty. I covered her property tax late fees one winter when they didn't realize the bill was overdue. Every time I helped, it was framed as temporary, just until Ronald's next commission came in or until the refinance paperwork went through. By the time I was 25 and the trust officially transferred to me, I had a quiet understanding with myself. This money was not for them. My dad left it for me, not for Ronald. Not for the household. For me. That didn't stop them from treating it like shared funds. My mom started asking vague questions, how it was managed, how much was left, whether I'd considered setting some of it aside for family planning. Ronald got bolder. One evening over dinner, he asked if I'd ever thought about making it official, folding the trust into a family account so it could grow for all of us. I nearly choked on my wine. It wasn't a conversation. It was a test. I knew it. He was gauging how much control I was willing to hand over. I gave him nothing. No, I said flatly. That money's not on the table. He laughed, but the tension under it was sharp. That's what lawyers are for, he said, shrugging. Everything's negotiable. My mom said nothing. She just kept slicing her chicken, eyes fixed on the plate like none of it concerned her. From then on, things shifted. Ronald got colder. Not aggressive, just quietly resentful. Passive digs about how some people are lucky enough to be handed a cushion. Mom mirrored him in small ways. She stopped calling as often. When I visited, the warmth was gone. It felt like every interaction was a quiet evaluation. How much longer would I stay out of reach? But I still came around. I still picked up her prescriptions. I still dropped off groceries when she texted last minute. I still checked in after storms to make sure the power hadn't gone out. Because in some part of me, I still believed that if I stayed present, if I kept showing up, she'd remember what our bond used to be. Instead, things kept drifting. Ronald started talking about early retirement, flipping houses, investing in a lakeside cabin. All pipe dreams built on the assumption that something was coming. I wasn't naive. I knew what he was counting on. And then last year, my mom called with what she said was a small favor. She and Ronald had found a duplex they wanted to buy. Nothing major, she said breezily. Just a joint investment. We'd rent out the other side, it would pay for itself. She didn't say it outright. But the ask was there. She wanted me to offer up my inheritance, or at least part of it, as their down payment. Said I'd still technically own half. That it was a family opportunity. I declined. Politely. Firmly. Without apology. The silence on the other end lasted too long. Well, she said finally, I guess we'll have to get creative. And then she hung up. That was 3 months ago. A week later, they invited me to brunch. Said it had been too long. Said they wanted to reconnect. Said nothing about the money. And I said yes. Because after everything, I still wanted to believe there was something real left between us. But what I walked into was not brunch. And what they handed me was not a menu. It was a trap. After the inheritance transferred fully to me, something subtle but undeniable shifted. It wasn't overnight. There was no single blow-up, no door-slamming argument or angry voicemail. It was quieter than that, colder. I noticed it first in how my mom talked to me. Her tone softened in ways that didn't feel gentle, just strategic. She started prefacing conversations with phrases like, I know it's not my place to ask, or of course it's your money, before inevitably landing on whatever she wanted. A new fridge. A small remodel. The chance to finally take that trip Ronald and I have been putting off for years. The asks were always indirect, but not subtle. And when I didn't immediately offer, she'd add something like, you know, Ronald's been like a real father to you. He's done so much for this family. I wanted to ask, what family? The one he married into when I was already a teenager? The one he contributed to by giving me unsolicited advice and leaving me off the birthday gift rotation? But I didn't say that. I just said no. Not angrily. Just plainly. That's when the air started changing. Ronald stopped speaking to me directly when I came by. If I dropped off groceries or ran an errand for my mom, he'd stay in the other room, TV volume just a bit too loud, like he needed me to know he wasn't interested in chatting. If he did say something, it was clipped. Dismissive. Comments like, must be nice having options, or that trust fund working overtime these days? At first, I brushed it off. He'd never exactly been warm, and I assumed this was just his pride getting bruised. But over the next few weeks, the coldness settled in deeper. My mom started hesitating before inviting me over. If I texted to check in, she'd respond hours later with something short and vague. She canceled dinner plans twice in a row, blaming headaches. The third time, she just said they were keeping things quiet this week. I stopped by unannounced one Saturday afternoon with a bag of fresh produce I'd picked up from the farmer's market. My mom answered the door and looked surprised, uncomfortable, even. Ronald wasn't in sight, but I could hear voices from the living room. When I stepped inside, the conversation stopped immediately. There were 2 glasses of wine on the table and a folder sitting open between them. Ronald closed it quickly when I entered, then stood and walked to the kitchen without acknowledging me. My mom didn't explain. She just took the bag from my hands and said thank you. I didn't ask questions, but I noticed the way her eyes avoided mine. That night, I sat on my couch, replaying the visit in my head. The wine glasses, the folder, the tension in her shoulders. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had walked in on something I was never meant to see. Over the next few weeks, those moments kept piling up. Little things. The way my mom would pause mid-conversation and glance at Ronald before answering something. How she started referring to the house as ours instead of mine and Ronald's, like I was somehow being edged out of the family's language altogether. And then came the vacation conversation. It was early spring, and I was over helping fix their back deck, rotting wood, loose railings, a few boards that needed replacing. I had offered because my mom mentioned it was becoming a safety issue and hiring someone would be expensive. I brought my tools, spent the afternoon working, and stayed for dinner. We were finishing up when Ronald casually dropped it into conversation. So we've been thinking about Europe this fall, he said, pouring another glass of wine. Spain. Maybe Portugal. Never done the coast. I nodded politely. Sounds great. He looked directly at me. It would be easier to book something if we had a little flexibility, you know? Then a beat. Travel points, a contribution, whatever. It's been a tough couple of years. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. My mom jumped in after a pause. We're not asking for anything, Eleanor. Just saying it would be nice to go while we still can. I stared at her. I'm not funding a vacation. She gave a small smile, the kind people use when they're pretending not to be disappointed. Of course not. I just meant he's been good to us. It wouldn't kill you to be generous once in a while. I didn't say what I was thinking. That I'd been generous for years. That I'd paid their parking tickets, filled their freezer when they were short on groceries, and helped cover their heating bill 2 winters ago. That I'd paid for the same deck I just spent hours repairing. I just stood, thanked them for dinner, and left. After that, the messages came less often. I'd get vague group texts about holidays or birthdays, but rarely a direct call or check-in. I sent my mom a card on Mother's Day with a photo of us from a few years back, one where she was genuinely laughing. I never got a response. The next time I saw them was at my cousin's wedding. They were both dressed up, Ronald in a crisp gray suit, my mom in a navy wrap dress I'd never seen before. She looked good, collected, happy in the kind of way you rehearse in a mirror. When she spotted me during cocktail hour, she walked over alone. Hey, stranger, she said lightly. Hi, I replied, offering a smile. We made small talk. She asked about work, about the apartment. Then she leaned in slightly. We should catch up. Just us. Soon. I agreed. It felt genuine. Later that night, I saw her and Ronald talking to my uncle by the bar. He gestured at me and said something I couldn't hear. Ronald shook his head. Then he made a joke loud enough to catch a few glances. Well, we'll see if she remembers where she came from when it counts. My stomach dropped. 2 weeks later, I got the brunch invitation. The text was short. We'd love to have you over this weekend. Casual brunch. Just family. Sunday at 11. No emojis. No elaboration. It didn't feel like an olive branch. It felt like a summons. Still, I said yes. Because some part of me still believed in giving people a chance to show you who they really are. I just didn't realize they already had. It was a quiet Sunday morning when I pulled into their driveway. The air had that strange stillness it gets just before a storm, bright but heavy, like something was holding its breath. The front door was already cracked open, and I could hear the soft clinking of dishes from the kitchen. No smell of bacon or coffee cake. No brunch music playing. Just a low, awkward silence that didn't belong in a house trying to host anything casual. I stepped inside. My mom was in the kitchen, pouring coffee. She looked up with that too-wide smile that people put on when they want you to believe everything's fine. "Hi, honey." "You're early," she said, glancing at the clock even though she'd been the one to pick the time. "I'm on time," I said, setting down my bag. Ronald was already seated at the dining room table, dressed unusually formal for a weekend, button-down shirt, blazer, no tie. Across from him sat two people I didn't recognize. Late 40s, both of them. Polite smiles. They didn't look like brunch guests. No one had plates. Just notebooks. Pens. A folder at the center of the table, perfectly aligned with Ronald's hands. I looked at it, then back at him. "What's this?" I asked, not sitting down. Ronald gestured toward the chair across from him. "Why don't you join us, and we'll walk you through it?" My mom set down a mug in front of me. "Let's all just sit. Talk like family." I stayed standing. Ronald opened the folder. "We've had some discussions," he said, his tone measured, like a man reading off a prepared script. "And we realized this whole situation with your father's trust, well, it's created unnecessary division." I blinked. "Unnecessary division?" "Yes," my mom said quickly. "This doesn't have to be complicated. We're just trying to make things equitable. Fair." Ronald slid the folder toward me. "This is a formal reallocation agreement," he said. "It outlines a more balanced structure. Nothing crazy, just a percentage redistribution, so everyone benefits." "Everyone," I repeated. He nodded. "We had it drafted by a mutual contact." "These are friends of ours," he said, motioning to the people sitting quietly to the side. "They're here to witness. Standard procedure." I didn't move. Inside the folder was a legal document. A proposed transfer of a portion of the inheritance, roughly 40%, into a joint investment account in my mother and Ronald's names. The language was dressed up in vague terms: mutual benefit, family legacy, cooperative growth. But the bottom line was simple. They wanted my money. The same money my father had explicitly set aside, protected, and assigned to me in writing, years before Ronald even entered our lives. I looked at my mom. "You knew this was happening?" She flinched. "Just slightly. We talked about it, yes. But it's not what you think. We're not trying to take anything from you." "No?" I asked. Ronald leaned back, hands folded. "Eleanor, your dad left you a lot. More than anyone expected. And we've all had tough years. This just evens the playing field." I felt something tighten in my chest. Not anger. Not yet. Just disbelief. This wasn't some spontaneous pitch. This had been planned. Coordinated. The folder. The witnesses. The timing. This was a trap. And the worst part? They thought I'd walk into it blindly. "We just want what's right," my mom said, quieter now. "What your father would have wanted." I stared at her, then at the papers again. And for the first time all morning, I smiled. "Good timing," I said, reaching into my bag. "I've got someone on the way too." That got their attention. Ronald's head tilted. "What do you mean?" I said, pulling out a thin manila envelope and setting it beside theirs. "You're not the only ones who planned ahead." Their confusion was immediate. Ronald reached for the envelope, but I stopped him with a glance. "You'll want to wait," I said. "My lawyer will be here in 10. And she's bringing the original copy of the will. The one Dad signed. The one that names me sole beneficiary, with express instructions that no part of the estate be distributed, reallocated, or merged." Ronald scoffed. "We're not contesting the will." "No," I said evenly. "You're just pretending it doesn't matter." The witnesses exchanged looks. My mom sat down slowly, her hands trembling slightly as she reached for her mug. "Eleanor," she said, "this doesn't have to become a thing." "It already is," I said. "You invited me here under false pretenses. You brought people into your home to pressure me into signing away something that doesn't belong to you." Ronald stood. "No one's pressuring anyone." "You think I don't know what this is?" I asked, stepping closer. "You planned this. You chose a quiet weekend, stacked the room with people you thought could sway me, and hoped I'd sign out of guilt or confusion. But you didn't count on me knowing my rights." Ronald's jaw tightened. "We're just trying to build something for the future. Then build it with your own money." He didn't answer. My mom looked up at me. Her eyes were glossy now. We thought you'd understand. After everything. After how much we've done for you. The words rang out like an echo of every conditional kindness I'd ever accepted. You didn't do those things for me, I said. You did them because you thought I'd pay you back. No one spoke. The room was silent except for the ticking wall clock and the faint hum of the fridge. I walked toward the table, closed the folder they'd given me, and slid it back across to Ronald. I'm not signing anything. And if you bring this up again, you'll be hearing from my attorney directly. Ronald didn't move. My mom stared down at her coffee like she wanted it to tell her what to do. The witnesses stood awkwardly, clearly unsure whether to stay or leave. One of them cleared their throat. Should we? You can go, I said, not looking at them. They left quickly. As the door shut behind them, I turned back to Ronald. Don't mistake my silence over the years for ignorance, I said. I've let a lot slide. But not this. He held my gaze for a long moment. Then finally sat down, slowly, like he'd suddenly aged 5 years in 5 minutes. My mom didn't say anything else. I gathered my envelope, tucked it back into my bag, and headed toward the door. You said you wanted to talk like family, I said quietly. But family doesn't ambush each other. And then I walked out. They didn't follow. I didn't wait for them to respond. I walked out of that house like it was burning behind me. The sun was still bright when I stepped onto the porch, but everything felt dim. The sky, the lawn, even the sound of traffic a few blocks away, it all felt muffled. Like the world was trying to process what just happened with me. I got in my car, shut the door, and just sat there for a moment. Hands on the wheel. Breathing in that tight, shallow way you do after something knocks the air out of you. Then I picked up my phone and called Amanda. She answered on the second ring. You okay? She asked immediately. I must have sounded off when I texted her earlier that morning, giving her the heads up I might need backup. They tried to corner me, I said. There were witnesses. Paperwork. A drafted agreement. Jesus. They wanted me to sign over nearly half. Said it was more fair that way. Amanda let out a breath that sounded more like a growl. Did you sign anything? No, good, she said. I'll come by later. But Eleanor, we should probably send them something. Preemptively. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. Yeah, let's talk through options tonight. Proud of you, she said. Then softer, I know that couldn't have been easy. I ended the call and drove home, windows down even though it was still cold. I needed the air. I needed something real to hold on to. My apartment was quiet when I got in. I kicked off my shoes, dropped my bag by the door, and went straight to the kitchen. Poured myself a glass of water and drank it like it might fill something other than just thirst. Then I sat at my table, stared at the blank wall, and just let it hit me. All of it. The way Ronald's voice had flattened when I said no. The way my mom looked away, like she couldn't bear to meet my eyes after I called them out. The way she still tried to soften it with that tired old line, "We're not trying to take anything from you." As if couching theft in soft language somehow made it forgivable. It wasn't just the paperwork. It was the fact that they thought I wouldn't see through it. That they thought I owed them, just by existing. That every time I dropped off a grocery bag, covered a bill, or answered a late-night call, they'd been tallying it as proof of something I should eventually surrender. I thought about every birthday dinner I'd planned. Every time I'd picked up the slack when Ronald forgot the mortgage due date or when my mom couldn't face opening another envelope with bad news. I thought about the time I left work early to drive her to urgent care because she was too scared to call an ambulance, and Ronald had said he was in the middle of something. I remembered thinking, at least I can be there for her. At least I'm useful. But that was the problem, wasn't it? I wasn't a daughter to them. I was a backup plan. A financial safety net in human form. Just useful enough to keep around, just quiet enough to assume I'd stay agreeable. And when I didn't, they tried to rewrite the terms. I went to the closet and pulled out the lockbox where I kept copies of my dad's documents. Trust paperwork, letters from his lawyer, the original will, all of it. I opened the folder slowly, like it was something sacred. Because in a way, it was. My father hadn't left me millions. But what he left was solid. Thoughtful. Intentional. He'd seen the world clearly. And more importantly, he'd seen me clearly. Even when I was 11, he knew who I might need to be someday and what kind of protection I'd require to become her. He'd put guardrails in place so no one could reach in and take what wasn't theirs. And now they were trying anyway. I stared at his signature. His clean, steady handwriting. I remembered him sitting at the kitchen table on Sunday nights, balancing the checkbook, explaining compound interest to me like it was the most important thing in the world. I remembered him saying, "Money doesn't buy peace, but it protects your right to find it." He was right. And now I knew what that protection had been guarding me from all along. I wasn't crying. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't even surprised anymore. Just tired. Tired of trying to keep something afloat that was never built to hold me. That night, Amanda came over with her laptop and a bottle of wine. We sat on my floor, surrounded by manila folders and legal pads. She drafted a cease and desist while I reviewed it line by line. It was direct. Not threatening, but clear. If they tried anything again, if they so much as hinted at coercion, we'd escalate. Officially. After she sent the draft to her paralegal for final review, we sat in silence for a while. The wine untouched. "You doing okay?" she asked finally. "I think I'm done," I said. "Trying to fix things. Trying to make it look like we're a real family." Amanda nodded like she'd been waiting for me to say it. "It's not your job to be the glue," she said. "Especially not when they're the ones breaking everything." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The next morning, I woke up to a text from my mom. Just 3 words. "We need to talk." I didn't reply. I didn't need to talk. I'd finally heard everything they'd been saying, just not with words. They'd told me who they were the second they handed me that folder. And now, for the first time in my adult life, I was listening. Amanda filed the cease and desist before 10 a.m. the next morning. She didn't waste time with pleasantries, just a clear, formal letter addressed to both my mother and Ronald, citing inheritance tampering, attempted coercion, and unauthorized efforts to reallocate a legally binding trust. It wasn't written to spark a war, but it left no room for confusion. By noon, Ronald had called me twice. The first time, I let it ring. The second time, I watched the screen for a full 10 seconds before hitting decline. He left a voicemail. "You think you're untouchable?" His voice was tight, borderline shaking. "You think threatening us with lawyers is going to fix anything? We gave you everything. A roof. Support. You'd still be nothing without your mother and me. You're burning bridges you can't rebuild. Remember that." The message cut off mid-sentence. I forwarded it to Amanda. That afternoon, my mom left one too. Her voice cracked almost immediately. "Eleanor, please don't do this. I know it didn't come out right. Ronald, he gets intense. But he means well. We were just trying to make plans for the future. As a family. You're turning this into something ugly. And for what? Money? Please don't let this ruin everything we've built." She didn't say she was sorry. Not once. I didn't respond. Instead, I drove across town to the courthouse and filed a petition to have the original will and trust formally entered into probate court. Amanda walked me through the process. Once entered, any attempt to challenge or reinterpret the trust would need to go through a judge. It wasn't bulletproof, but it was solid, an extra wall between them and what they thought they were entitled to. The clerk barely glanced at the documents before stamping them. Routine. Unremarkable. Just another file in a system full of people trying to draw lines where others had crossed them. I went home and made tea. Answered a few work emails. Tried to resume something like normalcy. But within a day, the ripple effect started. My cousin Jenna texted me first. "Hey, just heard something weird. Uncle Ronald says there's a situation with the family trust. You okay?" I stared at the message for a while before replying. "It's being handled. It's personal. Thanks for checking in." She didn't push. But others did. By Thursday, I'd gotten a mix of calls and texts from people I hadn't heard from in years. A former neighbor. My mom's sister. A guy Ronald used to coach in Little League who now worked at the same insurance office as my stepfather's friend. They all had the same confused tone, like someone had handed them a puzzle with half the pieces missing. I kept my answers short and neutral. The trust was left to me by my father. There was an attempt to interfere with it. Legal steps have been taken to protect it. No blame. No accusations. Just facts. Still, word spread. And with it, narratives. Ronald, apparently, had begun framing the whole thing as a misunderstanding. According to one text forwarded to me by a family friend, he claimed I had overreacted to a casual suggestion and was now threatening lawsuits over hurt feelings. I didn't bother correcting anyone. Let him spin. I had paperwork, dates, voicemails, witnesses, and I had clarity. The calls from my mom didn't stop. She left messages almost daily. Always emotional, always pleading. We're family, Eleanor. Please don't do this. You've always been the strong one. Be the bigger person now. We were just trying to secure something for the future. Isn't that what your father would have wanted? Every message was soaked in guilt, but never in ownership. She wanted repair without responsibility. Forgiveness without an apology. I listened to each one. Then I deleted them. I started sleeping better. Amanda and I met twice more to finalize the filing. We added documentation from the day of the brunch, including the folder they gave me, the names of the witnesses, and the transcript of Ronald's voicemail. This sends a message, Amanda said. Not just to them, but to anyone they might try to rally. Good, I thought. Let it echo. I didn't want war. But I was done being careful so that other people could stay comfortable. 2 weeks later, I ran into my aunt at a grocery store. My mother's sister. She looked at me like she wasn't sure which version of the story to believe. We chatted briefly near the produce section. Then, after a pause, she asked, "Did it really go that far?" I didn't deflect. "They invited me to brunch," I said. Sat me at a table with 2 witnesses and a legal document they wanted me to sign. Reallocating part of my inheritance. Without warning. Without discussion. They didn't even pretend it was about anything else. She looked down at the apples in her hand. "I didn't know," she said. I nodded. Most people didn't. When I left the store, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. Not vindicated. Just steady. I knew there would be more fallout. Maybe months from now. Maybe years. Holidays would be awkward if they happened at all. Relationships I'd once tolerated for the sake of tradition might quietly fall away. And maybe that was the point. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't holding the weight of a family that only showed up when they wanted something. I wasn't smoothing things over. I wasn't cushioning anyone's guilt. I was simply standing where I was, unapologetic and unmoved. And that, in itself, was a boundary they'd never seen coming. The renovation never happened. I found out from a neighbor I used to babysit for back in high school. She ran into me outside a hardware store one afternoon, shopping for a few tools for my new place. Said she hadn't seen much activity at my mom's house lately. Weren't they supposed to be gutting the kitchen? She asked casually. I shrugged. Plans changed. She nodded slowly. Yeah, Ronald hasn't been around much either. Or if he has, he's keeping a low profile. My husband saw him unloading something from the truck a few weeks back. Said he looked off. Real tense. I didn't ask for details. A few days later, my cousin texted me out of the blue. Is everything okay with your mom and Ronald? I ran into them last weekend and he was practically vibrating. Said something weird about people turning on him and how you'd regret what you'd done. I responded with a simple, "They're working through some things." It wasn't a lie. What they were working through, though, was the absence of access. The realization that the money they'd quietly penciled into their future plans was no longer an option. That they'd counted on me folding and I didn't. That the person they thought was the fallback had become the firewall instead. I never heard from the 2 witnesses again. Amanda said it was unlikely they'd admit anything if asked, probably just acquaintances of Ronald's who'd been fed a sanitized version of the whole thing. Sign here, just a formality. But it didn't matter. Their presence that day wasn't about legal force, it was about psychological pressure. Another layer to make the setup feel legitimate. Official. Inescapable. And when it didn't work, the illusion crumbled fast. The messages from my mom stopped for a while after the court filing. Weeks passed. I assumed she was regrouping or maybe letting Ronald do the talking now. Then, one afternoon, I got the final message. It came through at 3:14 p.m. A long paragraph. No greeting. No goodbye. She accused me of turning my back on her. Said I was punishing her for things she couldn't control. That I had let lawyers and paperwork define a relationship that was supposed to be unconditional. She called it betrayal. And then, I hope you find peace in whatever version of family you're building without us. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. I didn't hate her. That would have been easier, honestly. Cleaner. But this wasn't about hate. It was about finally seeing things for what they were and choosing not to participate anymore. While they spiraled quietly, I worked on building something else. I moved to a new apartment, something modest, but mine entirely. A walk-up with brick walls, good light, and a neighbor who baked too often and always shared. I bought furniture that matched, replaced old hand-me-downs with pieces I actually liked, and set up a real workspace in the second bedroom. No more hunched-over laptop at the kitchen table setups. I was investing in stability and routine in myself. The trust stayed untouched beyond what I needed for the move. Amanda connected me with a financial advisor she trusted, and we spent weeks outlining a long-term plan, investments, emergency reserves, charitable giving goals, all of it. It felt like breathing through clean air for the first time. Like all the static from the past few years had finally cleared. I didn't post about any of it online. No updates, no aesthetic apartment tour, no fresh start captions. I wasn't interested in broadcasting my transformation. This wasn't about proving a point. It was about living in a way that no longer required one. My days became quiet, full in a way that surprised me. I started walking more. Not power walking, not multitasking, I just walked. Mornings before work, evenings after. I let myself be bored sometimes. Let silence stretch without needing to fill it. For the first time in years, there wasn't a crisis to manage or a fire to put out. I reconnected with old friends. People I hadn't seen in a long time because I'd been too drained to be good company. I started meeting one of them every other Wednesday for coffee. No agenda. Just connection. And slowly, my life began to feel like mine again. I still thought about my mom. Not every day, but often enough that I kept her number in my phone, even though I never called it. I didn't block her. I didn't delete her. I just let the silence sit there unanswered. Once, I saw her in passing. At a gas station of all places. I was on my way back from a weekend trip, pulling into the lot as she was coming out of the store. We locked eyes through the glass. She looked surprised. Not angry. Just caught. She didn't wave. Neither did I. But I saw the shift in her expression. A flicker of something that might have been recognition. Or regret. Or maybe just the realization that the daughter she once tried to corner into compliance wasn't playing the same game anymore. I got back into my car and drove away. That night, I journaled for the first time in months. Just a few lines. She looked older. Smaller somehow. I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt done. I think that's what real transformation looks like. Not a big dramatic moment. Not a confrontation or a confession. Just the quiet shift where your energy stops bending toward people who only reach for you when they want something. Ronald's name didn't come up again. Not in calls. Not in texts. Not in the fragments of gossip that still made their way through extended family. I heard through Amanda, who heard through a client, that the renovation project had fully collapsed. They'd put in for a loan, but something fell through. The paperwork didn't match the projected income. Someone raised a red flag. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was karma. Either way, it wasn't mine to carry. I was too busy building something real. Something mine. And for the first time in a long time, that was more than enough. It was early spring when my mom reached out again. Almost 8 months had passed since the brunch. 8 months of silence, broken only by forwarded mail and one automatic birthday text that read like it was sent through clenched teeth. I hadn't expected anything more. But this message felt different. It was short. Simple. No layered subtext. No, we need to talk pressure. Just, hi Eleanor. If you're open to it, I'd like to see you. Just me. No expectations. I understand if the answer is no. I read it twice before setting my phone down. Left it there for an hour before picking it up again. There was no follow-up. No guilt, no bait, no attempt to soften or redirect. And that, oddly, was what made me reply. Okay. One coffee. Public place. Just us. We met that Saturday at a small cafe 2 neighborhoods away from where either of us lived. Neutral ground. I got there first. Chose a window seat. She walked in 5 minutes later, wearing a faded blue jacket I hadn't seen in years and no makeup. Her eyes looked tired, but not guarded. She scanned the room, spotted me, and gave a small nod. No hug. No forced smile. Just a quiet acknowledgement. She ordered tea. Sat across from me without making small talk. We let the silence stretch for a moment, and for once, she didn't try to fill it. Then she said I was wrong. That was it. No setup. No explanation. I waited. I thought I was doing what made sense, she said, eyes on the chipped edge of her cup. For the household. For our future. That's what I told myself. But that's not the truth. I didn't say anything. I was scared, she continued. Scared we wouldn't have enough. Scared of what people would think if we lost footing. Ronald convinced me that the money was flexible. That you'd understand. She looked up at me. You didn't deserve to be put in that position. I nodded once. No, I didn't. I let him lead that conversation, she said. And I let myself follow it because it was easier than facing what we'd already done wrong. That part landed heavier than the rest. It was the first time she'd said it, not just that the brunch had been wrong, but that the whole pattern had been. Years of unequal weight, of expectation, of showing up when it was convenient and disappearing when it counted. I don't expect forgiveness, she said after a moment. But I wanted to say it. Out loud. For a long time, I didn't respond. I just watched her. Not with anger. Not even with sadness anymore. Just observation. Like I was trying to decide if the person sitting in front of me was the same woman I'd been trying to win over for most of my life. You're not the only one who followed Ronald's lead, I said quietly. But you're the only one who gets to decide what happens now. She swallowed. I haven't spoken to him about this meeting. Good, I said. Because he's not part of this. She nodded. I'm not ready to pretend nothing happened, I continued. And I'm not interested in rebuilding what we had. That dynamic doesn't work for me anymore. I understand. But I'm open to seeing what something new might look like. With boundaries. With honesty. She looked down, nodded again, and wiped under her eye before anything fell. We didn't hug when we left. There wasn't some dramatic reconciliation or sudden emotional breakthrough. But we walked out side by side. And for once, I didn't feel like I was the one carrying all the weight. In the weeks that followed, we started exchanging texts. Nothing deep, just updates. A photo of her new planter boxes. A recommendation for a book she said reminded her of me. I didn't respond right away, and I didn't force the connection forward. I let her earn the space slowly. Ronald never came up. When she asked to meet again for lunch, I agreed, but kept it short. When she offered to swing by my apartment with a few of my dad's things she'd recently unpacked, I gave her a time window and asked her to text before she arrived. She followed every boundary. Never pushed. Never assumed access. And in doing so, she started showing me something I hadn't seen before, not just remorse, but change. Subtle, maybe. Imperfect. But real. One afternoon, as we were cleaning out a few old boxes, she handed me a photo of my dad holding me at the beach. I must have been 4. He was squinting into the sun, smiling like nothing else mattered. I've kept this in my nightstand, she said. Even through all of it. I think I forgot how much you remind me of him. That stopped me for a second. Not because I needed the compliment, but because I finally realized why she'd let Ronald take up so much space. She'd spent years trying to rewrite what was lost, trying to build a version of family that didn't require grief or repair. And when that didn't work, she tried to control what she could. It didn't excuse anything, but it explained enough. And I didn't need more than that. We didn't talk about the trust again. Or the brunch. Or the messages she left in the weeks that followed. That part had been boxed up, filed, and sealed. Not forgotten. But no longer active. What we had now was something quieter. Tentative. Not built on history, but on the absence of pressure. She didn't expect emotional labor from me. And I didn't offer more than I had. I told her plainly that Ronald and I had no relationship, that I didn't want to hear about him or speak to him or pretend there was common ground. She said she understood. And this time, I believed her. We still don't see each other often. Once every few weeks, maybe. Sometimes just a check-in over coffee. Sometimes a walk through the park. She never assumes anything will happen again. She always asks. That matters. Because trust isn't something you give back like a returned item. It's something you rebuild, brick by brick. With space, with time, and with consistency. And for the first time in a long time, I'm not the only one doing the heavy lifting. It's been just over a year now. 12 months since I walked into that house expecting eggs and coffee and walked out with every illusion burned clean. And I've never been more certain that I did the right thing. My life isn't dramatic these days. It's not full of big declarations or tense standoffs or strategy meetings with lawyers. It's just quiet. Structured. Mine. The trust is still intact. My finances are stable. I check in with my advisor quarterly, and the only time I think about money now is when I'm deciding whether to book a flight or finally replace my aging laptop. The mental space that opened up once I stopped worrying about who might try to touch what wasn't theirs, that alone feels like wealth. I moved again, a few months back. Nothing drastic, just a bit more space. A small balcony, better light, a little room for the dog I finally got. His name is Reed. He's a rescue. Loud when he wants attention, quiet the rest of the time. We're a good match. Work is solid. My friendships are too. I've grown close with people I used to keep at arm's length, not because they weren't good to me, but because I was so used to protecting my energy that I didn't know how to let anyone in unless they needed something. Now I let people in for no reason at all. We cook. We walk. We talk about nothing. And it means everything. My mother and I speak once or twice a month. It's not warm exactly, but it's real. She sends updates when someone in the extended family gets married or moves away. Occasionally, she asks if I'd like to have lunch. I say yes about half the time. There's no longer any pretense. She doesn't bring up Ronald. She doesn't ask for anything. And in that distance, those boundaries, we found something closer to peace than we ever had when I was the daughter who said yes to everything. As for Ronald, he's disappeared almost entirely from my world. I know he's still around. Probably still working in some capacity. But I haven't seen him since the day of the brunch. And I have no intention of changing that. Every now and then, I hear from someone who doesn't know the full story, an old family friend, or someone from my hometown, and they'll say something vague like, I heard there was some tension a while back. Hope things are smoothing over. I don't correct them. I just smile and say, everything's where it needs to be. Because it is. People assume that clarity comes from big moments, slammed doors, final arguments, dramatic declarations. But for me, it came in the aftermath. In the stillness. In every choice I made without their input. Every plan I formed without permission. And what I've learned is this. Protecting what's yours isn't selfish. It's survival. Especially when other people think they're entitled to rewrite the terms of your life because they played a role in one chapter. Ronald thought my silence meant I was soft. That because I'd always been agreeable, I'd stay that way. He mistook kindness for compliance. And when I didn't bend, he didn't know what to do. My mother, for all her flaws, is at least trying. Trying to rebuild something with truth instead of obligation. And I've let her for now. But I don't offer her the version of me she used to know. That version is gone. Not out of bitterness. Just growth. Because here's the truth they never understood. I wasn't the one holding the family together. I was the one being held in place so they could keep pulling from me without resistance. But once I stopped holding still, once I walked out of that brunch with the real Will and the full story, the roles changed. They tried to ambush me with a folder. Instead, I served them reality. And now? I'm not angry. I'm not even vindicated. I'm just grounded. Clear. I live a life that doesn't require anyone else's approval. One where my energy isn't constantly rerouted to manage someone else's panic, or smooth over their recklessness, or pay down their debt, literal or emotional. I still walk most mornings. Reed trots ahead, tail high, nose twitching at every bush. Sometimes I pass houses that look like the one I grew up in, modest, familiar, a little worn at the edges. And I think about what it would have been like if things had gone differently. If they'd honored the trust instead of trying to break it. If they'd seen me as a person, not a resource. If family had meant respect instead of expectation. But then I let the thought go. Because I don't live in that house anymore. I live here. In this life I chose and protected and built. And no one gets to rewrite that. Not anymore. Thanks for sticking with me through the end. What would you have done if your own family tried to corner you like that? Have you ever had to protect what's yours from the people closest to you? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read everyone. And if you've ever had to choose peace over people-pleasing, hit that like button, subscribe for more true stories, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Your boundaries are valid. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise.